you're doing value debate or fact debate or policy debate?
I do, because I choose what format I compete in.
I was hoping you would say that, because most people think that. Most people say, I'm going to choose a format like LD, and then they say they confuse, I'm not saying you're confused here, but they confuse ingredient 1 topic with ingredient 3 format, or was that 2? I don't remember. They confuse the two. And so people will say the word or the phrase LD, Lincoln Douglas, synonymously with value because they think that the format determines the type of resolution. Not so. I've debated team value, where the resolutions were. I've debated LD policy. LD, the format means 1 versus 1, like Lincoln and Douglas when they debated. Team means 2 versus 2, or more people versus more people, like on weird British parley formats. The format and the wording are 2 separate issues. So whereas league officials, sometimes who are more gifted at administration or other events than debate itself, might call a particular format value debate, if they provide a resolution with the phrasing of fact debate or policy debate, it doesn't matter what you called it. It's the type of debate that the wording gives you. This means that the wording of the debate determines how you interpret the round. So here's the mistake that happens that we're here to help correct or help you never make in the first place. People learn theory about how to make an abstract comparison, and then they get a resolution like democracy is undervalued. And the theory and rules of thought that they learn for making abstract comparisons don't perfectly fit here. And vice versa, all the way through. So if you have learned value debate and you think that you're supposed to have a value, a criterion, and contentions, when you go against me, when I'm debating Walmart's business practices are detrimental to the United States and you don't find any value or criterion, you're going to say, what is going on? Because the way somebody debates this might not fit your expectation that you learned for what is being called value debate. But what's the audience there to do? They don't care about all that. They're just trying to make a determination about the topic. And so they don't come in and say, aha, this is value debate, and I will, facts be darned, ignore how the phrasing of the resolution is and try to pretend that it is an abstract comparison. They will simply judge it most of the time by how the resolution is phrased. Questions? I'll pause. This is a weird area for some people. Yeah?
So where would the Lincoln-Douglas resolution resolve that governments have a moral obligation to help other countries in need? Where would that go?
Perfect. We have a moral obligation to help other countries in need. Is that a value, fact, or policy resolution? Why? Sutton. Correct. So let's look at what we don't have to do to win this debate. What we don't have to do is prove that one type of moral obligation is greater than some other type of moral obligation. We're not required to do that. That might help us, but we're not required to do that. We're not required to say that the United States should do anything differently or even talk about whether what we're doing now is good or bad. We simply have to say, for this country or for the world or whatever, such an obligation exists. It's a subjective debate. That's it. It's a fact debate. Great question. More questions. Or we can just treat more examples. Or we can pull up the NFL LD list for the next year of topics and see if how many of them are policy, fact, or value. Okay, here we go. Adolescents ought to have iPhones that don't automatically scroll after you use them. Adolescents ought to have the right to make autonomous medical choices. Fact, value, or policy. Why? Why?
Because it's saying that adolescents should have that ability, and it's stating it as a fact, and it's a subjective fact.
Correct. Sir?
I think it's a policy resolution because it's stating an action that we don't necessarily have in the status quo.
So this is where the fun of debate happens. and you have to become good at interpreting resolutions. There's grounds to both arguments. And if this were a parley resolution, the entire debate after the first speech could focus on this issue alone. Was it a policy resolution or a fact resolution? Because on the one hand, the first person says, all it says is adolescents ought to have the right to make autonomous medical choices. I can give you 3 reasons why they ought to have that right. And he says, but practically there's no way to implement that. You can't actually, without violating rights of parents, go in and ascertain what the preference of the adolescent is. And if there's no method to do that, or if the methods aren't acceptable, then it doesn't matter if in the abstract they ought to have the right. You can't, through a policy mechanism known to Earth, find a way to give them that right. Therefore, you haven't really successfully defended the case. And he'll come back and say, that's not the point. Maybe someday we'll figure this out. We'll figure out how to give them the right. The question is, do they have it or do they not? And then we'll have this kind of back and forth about what were we supposed to be debating in the first place. Good. That one was open to interpretation. I agree. Next. Inaction in the face of injustice makes individuals morally culpable. Inaction in the face of injustice makes individuals morally culpable. On its face, I think it's a fact. You could theoretically get a couple different interpretations out of this. This is from, who asked where this is from? These are from the potential topics for 2015-15 NFL Lincoln Douglas debate. Does somebody have a question?
Well, I think it might also be considered value resolution as well.
How's that?
Because it's stating that, like in the face of danger, they could be morally culpable. That's subject to debate over the values of people.
So a favorable reconstruction of the intent of this resolution under his interpretation would be as follows. When injustice is present, an individual's moral culpability should be determined by inaction as much as action, or something along those lines. That would be the implied teasing out what the debate is saying. It's something about inaction versus action in an abstract sense, if there's a value debate there. I think that's probably a 20% likelihood of success interpretation, but it's there. And if you have reasons for it, you can succeed with that. Good. Does anybody need more examples to kind of help understand this? Everything ends up being fact when we read these. But that's the interesting thing, is that I think most of you probably thought of Lincoln-Douglas debate as value debate, but in reality, the vast majority of LD topics that I see are fact topics. When in conflict, cultural unity ought to be valued above cultural diversity. Okay, that's a value resolution, classically value. But what are the resolutions this year for both topics? LD?
In economic freedom ought to be valued above equity.
Okay, easy. That's a value debate. In economics, in some subject area, one thing ought to be valued over another thing. We're going to abstractly compare. What's the other topic? Good. So we're doing 2 value resolutions this year.
There's a second one for STOA. In the United States federal jurisprudence, letter of the law ought to have priority over the spirit of the law.
Lots of value resolutions this year. Maybe that's because I vetoed 7 STOA resolutions on the LD committee. I don't know. Okay. So any more questions about this? This is critical to understanding debate because people don't talk this way. And you lose knowledge over time, and the debate community begins to refer to and equate LD with value. And then you get really wonky things like this. You're using a value in policy. I'm voting against you, which makes literally no sense. Or you're using policies in value, so I'm voting against you, which again makes literally no sense. Humans make decisions. Debate is about decisions. Decisions combine action, value, and fact, because that's how we live in the world, is a combination of what do we believe, value, what's going on and should go on, fact, and policy. Yes?
I was wondering, as you were mentioning, that people kind of like get stuck in this mindset.
Yeah.
That is like Douglas' value, team policy is just policy. I was just wondering how you would suggest telling all this. Or
Good.
like running this kind of a case, like a back case in a value style setting, in front of a judge who has that.
Who has those kind of convictions? Yes. Okay. So, is your question related?
Yes.
Yeah. You can flesh it out more.
Like the topic, policy debaters have a reasonable expectation that when they go into the round, it's going to be about policy, and the other team's not going to try to take the policy resolution and turn it into a values resolution.
Correct.
So really, isn't it a fairness issue that the other team is expecting the kind of debate to be like this, like if the case is like topicality, like if the case had nothing to do with the topic.
Mm-hmm.
It would also be the same if their case had nothing to do with the format of debate or the type of debate that the other team that we all agreed on that we were going to have.
Great question. So let me clarify my previous statement. Here is what's wonky. What's wonky is not for a policy debater or judge to walk into a round expecting to debate about what our policy should be towards the Middle East and hearing about an abstract comparison of two values. That is wonky because it's not related to the topic. But what we should expect is that our values as a nation, you name it, be economic prosperity, preservation of life, so on, our values are determining our policy. And that's where debate judges still get wonky, is they say, you're not supposed to be talking about valuing life, even though our policy affects how people live and die, because that's a value. And we just want to hear about policies in the Middle East, to which the rebut is, if you're not doing things because of what you believe, then A, you have no business doing them, and B, you can't describe them as bad or good. You can make no judgment about policy aside from values, whether assumed or not assumed. So they're a fair part of the debate. Does that help answer your question? So I'm not saying somebody should come and interpret a policy resolution in a weird way and everybody should just be happy with that. I'm saying that arguments that have some sort of value or that have facts should be in every format of debate. Types of arguments that just have policies, facts, and values. And this is what happens in debate. It's called equivocation. Equivocation is the debater's nightmare fallacy. Because a word can have two definitions, and then we somehow all of a sudden make it have one. So value means both, one, having a viewpoint, human life is important, and two, a style of phrasing a resolution. The logical fallacy is when referring to value debate, we are referring to a style of phrasing of the resolution. The wonkiness is that I used a viewpoint in policy. I used the word value to describe my viewpoint. And the judge says, but we're not here to hear that type of debate.